Hello there, everyone. My name is Teresa McCloy, and you're listening to the Real Life Process podcast, episode number 178. It is great to be back with you this week on the podcast. Each week, I invite you to listen in as we share tips, stories, practical action steps that lead to living a life from rest, not rush. And we have switched up things just a bit here on the podcast in the last few weeks. If you have not joined us over on YouTube, we are also recording this live, and we have a YouTube channel at the Real Life Process. Just go out, search for the Real Life Process, and you'll find both a video, or you can listen to this on your favorite podcast player. We'll share ideas about our signature content of the Real Life Process and help you to thrive both in your life and your work, wherever you choose to join us for the podcast. So the content of the Real Life Process is a framework, and we work through that framework to help you develop what we call a unique modern day rule of life, where we do self-discovery, 90-day action projects, time management, and spiritual practices. Together, we discover how to craft this rule of life so that you can live in extraordinary moments each and every day. So whether you're listening or watching to grow yourself or your business, we're just glad you're listening and becoming a part of the Real Life Process community. As I said, we have made some pivots and some shifts. Two of those things are the YouTube channel, and also this summer here in 2022, we are walking through the signature content once again of the Real Life Process. We have a brand new book that will be coming out this fall. On November 1st, we'll be launching and releasing the book. And so we've just continued to refine and define the Real Life Process and what it is. What are these key components? How do we live those out in our lives? And how do we help others live those out? Many of you that listen to the podcast are in some way connecting to people, serving them and helping them, either through business or through ministry. And you use the content of the Real Life Process to do that. Or you might want to use the process of use the Real Life Process to do that. So we want to come alongside and walk through the content of the process once again. So last week, we just kind of went through some of those core things. And if you watch this on YouTube, you're actually going to see me share a slide deck with some different things on it. And you can go there, maybe you'll listen through the podcast, and then you'll say, man, I want to see the visuals that she's sharing. Head on over to the YouTube channel and just type in the Real Life Process or type in Teresa McCloy, and you can see the visuals that I'm going to be sharing as well. But if you remember on last week's episode number 177, we talked about the components of the process. When we begin to create this modern day rule of life, I love to have a framework to work through. So we talked about those components: real life being, just discovering more about ourselves and writing that down in some way, shape, or form. Real life action, how we take what we've written and now put it into motion, put it into action on the doing side of self. Real life time, how do we take the everyday, ordinary life of our calendar and again, continue that action and that motion forward. And then also real life living, learning to order our life with rhythms and routines of rest, renew, and review. So those are the four components. We're going to dive in today on this episode of the podcast, really breaking down how we create that modern day rule of life. And what we're going to talk about today on the podcast is using some tools to do that. So we have some signature tools that we love to introduce you to. And I'm going to talk about three of them today on the podcast. Those are the REALIFE Needs and Values Assessment, the REALIFE Enneagram Personality Tool, and the REALIFE Process Mindmap. So anytime that you're going to set up a system or a process, having these tools in your toolbox will give you a reference point and a place to come back to. And that is so important. When I was walking through my story and doing a lot of this discovery, having some things that I could have handles on and put handles on was so important, that I could grab onto and say, I can go back to this time and time again and use this again and again in the work that I'm doing and the growth that I'm having. So we're going to start by inviting you to discover and lean into these 3 signature tools before we ever begin to craft and write down this rule of life and begin to use what we call the real life view document to write these things on and capture them. So as we go on this journey, we're going to walk through all 3 of these today. The first one is the signature tool of Real Life Needs and Values. And this is actually an assessment that you can take. And we have this intro to the Real Life Needs and Values on our website. You can just go to the website at therealifeprocess.com and you can download this little intro guide to the Needs and Values Assessment. We also have, if you work with one of our coaches or our facilitators, we have the full-blown version, the big 17, 18-page Needs and Values Assessment that you can get as a resource from one of our coaches or our facilitators. But let's dive into what the Needs and Values Assessment is. According to Merriam-Webster's, a need is defined as a situation in which someone or something, let me start that again. In Merriam-Webster, need is defined as a situation in which someone or something must do or have something that is needed in order to live or succeed or be happy, a strong feeling that you must have or do something. So just think about that urge, that need that we have in us. And we're all created with these essential needs. You know, when we think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, food and water and shelter, but needs that we define through these words are also a part of that. And as I work with clients many times, and I discovered this in my own story, that we don't even know how to name it or give it language sometimes. And so that's what the Needs and Values Assessment really does, is it helps to give us language. Needs are not wants. Needs are what we must have in order to feel safe and grounded. And a lot of times when we talk about this, people have some resistance to, well, I don't have needs. We're taught so much in our culture to put others' needs before our own and, you know, to be kind, to do these things for other people. This is not talking about those things. It's talking about the needs that you have underneath inside of yourself that you were born and created with. Now, also as a believer, I do believe that God is the supplier of all of our needs. But this is actually language that we can give to use this to talk to God about these needs, to talk to God about these things that are inside of us. So let me give you an example of some needs that that you might feel or that you might want to give language to. So a need to communicate is one that we hear a lot. A need for honesty, a need for order, a need for acceptance or accomplishment. So if you head on over to the YouTube channel, you can actually see these lists of needs and values on the visual that I have up on the screen. But you can also download this at our website at therealifeprocess.com. And just begin to identify and give language to your needs. For example, if I have a need to be loved, how is that playing out in my life? Where am I feeling that need fulfilled? Where does that come up for me, that need is fulfilled for me? Remember, it's not a want, it is a need. It's at the basis of who we are. if I have a need to be acknowledged or a need to be accepted, where can I see that, oh, in that relationship, I was accepted. In that place, I felt cared for. Or if you have a need to be right, many times we want to shame ourselves around our needs, but giving them language. I personally have a need to work, and I have a desire to work. Now, if that goes too far, it goes into my workaholism tendencies. And so I have to balance that, and I have to live in harmony with that need. But I have a need to work. One of the things that I want to give you some action steps today here on the podcast as we talk through these things. And one of the action steps I would give you is bring someone in and have this conversation with them. So for me, when I was first learning about needs and values in this assessment, I wanted my husband Dale to be a part of that conversation. So one of the things that we did was we both took the assessment, and I actually wrote it down on a chalkboard inside of our home. And I put my needs and his needs and my needs and his values, so we could come into conversation around those things and recognize them in our relationship within our marriage and really use them in those ways. Just to have conversation that we both had a need for work. And for Dale, he had a need to be loved. And it's actually the word underneath that in the full assessment is he chose to be cherished. So for me as his wife, it was like, so how can I cherish Dale? How can I show up for him in those ways if that is a need that he actually has inside of him? So once that our needs are met, then we can begin to look at our values. Values are who you are, how you live out these needs. Once those needs are met, you express your values. And I think many times people want to take values and make them needs, and they're not. They're two different things. So if we go back and we're looking at that list of values, it's words like, I value creativity. I value being a catalyst. I value adventure. I value spirituality or teaching or winning. I value feelings and emotion. These are things that you value. And how are those values showing up in our lives? We're each uniquely created with needs and values. So one of the things we do in this first step in our first component of our process in the Real Life Being is begin to identify our top 5 needs and our top 5 values. So I encourage you to go over to the Real Life Process and download that free needs and values assessment and walk through and really sit with those words and see what comes up for you with your needs and values. It's one of the parts of getting connected to our internal being. Who are we? How are we put together? So this is one of the signature tools that we use here at the process. One of the very first things that we come into and that we do. Remember, values are who you are after you express yourself and after your needs are met. So let's look at our next tool. The next tool, well, before we do that, I want to share with you a story from one of our coaches. And Terri Johnson, you've heard her here on the podcast many times. And I love, this is something that she actually shares in the book that we have coming out this fall about the needs and values. She says, working through the needs and values assessment made me recognize that I have to honor those needs and values if I want to live wholeheartedly. We can't dismiss them. They're in us. She says, I realized to best honor those needs and values, it was important for me to plan adventure and risk. So adventure is one of her needs. In the past, when I didn't honor these parts of myself, I would become impulsive and jump into adventure and take risks that weren't necessarily healthy. Understanding my desire for communication, honesty, and integrity in my own life has continued to help me craft a life in a way that honors those things. It also helps me in choosing who I surround myself with so my needs and values are met, in particularly around owning my ongoing recovery work as a recovering alcoholic and drug addict. And so Terri is sharing very openly and honestly that her need for adventure, her need for risk early in her, her value adventure early in her life was lived out in some unhealthy ways. But when she was able to identify it and realize that that's a value, and her value is she loves to take risk, how can she do that in a healthy way? And so it's just really cool to see how this plays out when you are able to give your needs and your values language. So I love that. And I appreciate so much Terri sharing that story in the book that we have. So our second tool that we want to look at as we craft this modern day rule of life is actually, and I want to talk about, is the tool of the Enneagram. So the tool of the Enneagram is the tool that we use at the Real Life Process. And if you want to dive deep into the Enneagram and really learn about it and learn about the tool, you can go back and actually listen to the whole first year of the Real Life Process podcast is really based around the Enneagram and the tool of the Enneagram. It's a signature tool for us, and we have so much content in our beginning podcast episodes that you can learn about the Enneagram. But I just want to give you the overviews of the Enneagram. The Enneagram is based on 9 personality types, and we have a free typing guide that you can get in the show notes for the podcast. Just click on the link and you can download for free the free typing guide for the Enneagram. And it will introduce you to these 9 different types. But at its core, it's coming from 3 centers of intelligence: the body center, the heart center, and the head center. And within these 3 centers, there are 3 different types. And those 3 types help us know more about ourselves. And the 9 Enneagram types, the type 1 is a good person. The type 2 is a loving person. The type 3 is effective. The type 4 is original. The type 5 is wise. The 6 is loyal. The 7 is joyful. The 8 is powerful. And it's interesting, even as we work with clients, as I've worked with hundreds of clients over the past several years around the tool of the Enneagram, to see them discover and be introduced to, oh, I always approach things through my head, or I always approach things through my emotion, or I always begin to experience something in my body first. And that's that discovery of how I'm entering into the world and what energy I'm coming through in these 3 centers. This is so helpful. We have found this tool to be one of the deepest tools, both psychologically and spiritually. And I've been working with the tool now for almost 12 years, and it is just a beautiful piece of discovering your real life being. So I really encourage you to go out and download the free Real Life Enneagram typing guide that we have. Read through the paragraphs, read through the descriptions of each of these 9 types, and see what resonates with you, both in your authentic self and your adaptive self. Your best day and your worst day, this is how you might show up. And so we don't have time on this particular podcast to dive in deep, but it is a signature tool that we encourage you to connect with as you're discovering your real life being. Now, there are other great tools out there. There are tools like Strengths Finders and the Colby and the DISC that are all diving into some of that work, but we believe the Enneagram will take you on the deepest dive. I love this quote. We have this in the book from one of my Enneagram mentors, Claire Lowridge, and she says this in her book, Spiritual Rhythms of the Enneagram. She says, the Enneagram opens you to an extraordinary view to the truth about you. It can help you recognize your unique, melody, as well as where you are off key internally and relationally. The Enneagram reveals your tempos, soloist agendas, and dedication to your own playlist. I love the musical references there. Still, discovering the truth of your number can never encompass who you are, nor does it automatically change you or your relationships. So just discovering it and knowing what your type is, and if you're familiar with the Enneagram, you hear a lot of people say, I'm this type or I'm that type. It's not about just discovering your type. She goes on to say, relational repairs and healthy interaction take intention and attention. Enneagram insights have to be applied to the rhythms and grooves of your ordinary daily lives to bring transformation and harmony. And I believe that is so true. The Enneagram, discovering your type, discovering your harmony triad, how you connect head, heart, and body are just the beginning. It's when you take that and then help to shape your relationships, help to shape healthy interactions. When you know more about your internal, you can live it out daily in your external. And that's what the tool of the Enneagram helps us do. So knowing our needs and values, knowing who we are through personality tools of discovery like the Enneagram can really help us say, how do I want to craft this rule of life that I'm crafting? What do I know about me and how do I want to live that out? So the last tool we want to introduce you to here on this podcast episode to get us ready to go on this journey is another tool that I was introduced to several years ago, actually as part of my training when I was certified with the 12-week year. So several years ago, I took a training and certification with a book that's out on the market called The 12-Week Year, Learning to Live Your Life in these segments. We now call them 90 days, 90 days at a time, quarterly, how I'm going to live into the rhythms and routines and behaviors. But one of the tools that I learned there was this idea of the mind map. And we have taken this tool and we have made it our own in how we use it to get up on the balcony of our ideas, to get into our head and get the thoughts down on paper. We'll talk about this more in upcoming episodes here on the podcast about the mind map and how we use it. But really what it is just taking one concept, one idea, and putting it in the center of your paper or your whiteboard or a napkin, whatever it might be, and then writing other ideas that connect around the outside of that. It's a foundational tool. It helps you think outside the box and brainstorm and be creative, or brain dump your thoughts down. Many times we've been taught through school and through all kinds of things to do things in an order, and our brain just doesn't work that way. It has all kinds of ideas and thoughts. So when you see this circle, if you're watching on the video, when you see the circle with all the other circles around it, it just invites you to brainstorm something out. Many of us are visual learners, and so getting it down and seeing it that way, then we can break it apart and we can say, this is what's most important. This is what comes out of that. I hadn't even realized that I was thinking that. So the process of filling in the circles with words or thoughts allows us to gather them differently so we can see them through a new lens, is many times what I like to say. So something like, what are the big rocks in my life? We're going to talk about that on the next episode of the podcast. What are the areas in my life that matter to me? And we'll use the tool of the mind map to dive into that and to use it. So your action step for this particular tool is to actually use a mind map this week. Draw a circle on some thought or idea that you're trying to work through. It could be something as simple as, I need to clean out the garage. So you might write garage in the center of the circle. It's springtime here. Many of us are cleaning things out. And then you might write down, all the things that you want to do around cleaning out the garage. I want to sweep it out. I want to put some new shelving up. I want to organize things into tubs. So I'm going to need to go buy the tubs. You write all those things down, and then you decide what order that you want to do them in. Well, the first thing I'm going to need to do is go buy the things that I need or the cleaning supplies. Then I'm going to need to pick what time I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it Saturday. Am I going to do it Friday afternoon? Decide the time. You can see where then after you've brain dumped out something, you can put it into order. It's where we love the mind map. We'll use it in several different areas as we go throughout the process. So not going to have you download anything for this. You can just draw it out and you can just use it as you go throughout the week. So those are the 3 signature tools that we wanted to talk about on this episode of the podcast to get us ready to dive into this first component, the REALIFE Needs and Values Assessment. You can download that at the website. The REALIFE Enneagram Personality Tool. You can download that through our show notes, and also learning to use the mind map and think in that way. So we just invite you to check out all of those free downloads and resources that we have available, and just continue to listen each and every week as we go through the entire real life process, all 4 components. Next week, we'll be diving into those areas of focus in your life, and we'll begin to write down all of this into one place that we can walk through together. So thank you for listening to this episode of the Real Life Process podcast. We are so excited to help you grow and increase your life and the quality of your life through a process and through these components. But you also may be looking to work with others and increase your income and your impact by receiving this content in done for you form and being certified to help others as they walk through. If you want to know more about that, you can connect with us at therealifeprocess.com and learn more about joining our Real Life Facilitator Network. And downloading all these free resources, you can find it there to get a taste of our content as well. Make sure that you subscribe not only to the podcast, but also to the YouTube channel that we now have, because we don't want you to miss a single episode. We'll be back next week with more from the Real Life Process podcast. And remember that every ordinary day has an extraordinary moment in it. You just have to look for it. Be back next week. Talk to you soon, friends.